First at 11, Deere and Company is responding to former President Donald Trump's threat to put a 200% tariff on products the company tries to sell into the U.S. Trump made the comment during a campaign stop in Pennsylvania on Monday.
John Deere is moving some production from Iowa to Mexico.
John Deere making a big change to where they manufacture their farming equipment, leading to hundreds of U.S. layoffs.
I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States.
It began with a single sentence that rippled through American media like an earthquake. John Deere to shift major manufacturing operations overseas. By noon, the stock markets trembled, political talk shows ignited, and former President Donald Trump erupted online, his words carrying the weight of both fury and symbolism. To many Americans, this wasn't just about tractors or factories. It was about the soul of American industry, and whether the nation that once built the world's machines could still build its own future. For nearly 2 centuries, John Deere had been a cornerstone of American identity. Born in the soil of Illinois in 1837, its green and yellow machines became synonymous with the heartbeat of the Midwest, with farmers, laborers, and the quiet dignity of work. To many, John Deere wasn't just a company. It was a promise that American hands could still shape the earth. But that promise, as of 2025, was breaking. The announcement came quietly at first, a corporate statement citing strategic global realignment. Buried within its language was the revelation: key production lines in Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas would move to Mexico and Brazil over the next 2 years. Thousands of American workers were set to lose their jobs. The company framed it as efficiency, but for many it felt like betrayal. In a world already divided between automation and tradition, between global profit and national pride, John Deere's departure became a spark. It wasn't just a manufacturing story. It was the story of how the global economy finally came for America's heartland. Trump's response was immediate and visceral. The former president, long a self-styled defender of American labor, declared the move a disgrace and an act of economic treason. His words resonated across the Rust Belt, where factories once roared with life, but now stood silent. Hollow echoes of what was once called the arsenal of democracy. But beneath the outrage, the forces at work were far older and far more complex. The truth was that John Deere had been struggling to remain American long before this decision. Global competition, supply chain disruptions, and the relentless rise of automation had made domestic production increasingly unprofitable. For decades, economists warned that America's manufacturing model, dependent on cheap labor abroad yet rooted in domestic identity, was unsustainable. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed just how fragile that system was. Semiconductor shortages, steel price shocks, and trade gridlocks forced companies to rethink survival itself. John Deere's leadership, faced with mounting costs and foreign competition, made the calculation that many before them had: a calculation of numbers, not nostalgia. By 2024, the company's profit margins in the U.S. had shrunk to their lowest point in 15 years. Meanwhile, operations in South America were booming. Labor costs were nearly 60% lower, regulatory hurdles were lighter, and new trade agreements, particularly those signed under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada framework, made cross-border movement of goods easier than ever. For investors, it was a logical move. For workers, it was a knife in the back. The economic ripple was immediate. Within weeks, shares in rival U.S. equipment manufacturers plunged. Regional banks reported sudden pressure as local economies braced for layoffs. Small towns like Ottawa, Waterloo, and East Moline, places where John Deere wasn't just an employer but a way of life, faced existential uncertainty. The layoffs, analysts warned, would ripple beyond factory floors. Every lost job meant fewer groceries bought, fewer homes repaired, fewer taxes collected. In the small-town ecosystems of the Midwest, one manufacturer's move could erase decades of economic balance. By the winter of 2025, anger was spreading like wildfire. Protests erupted outside shuttered plants. Workers carried signs reading, "Made in America, died in America." For many, this was the final betrayal in a long pattern of corporate flight. First it was the textile mills, then the steelworks, then the auto plants. Now, even the tractors, the very tools of the nation's food supply, were being built elsewhere. Trump, sensing opportunity, positioned himself at the center of the storm. He held rallies across affected states, promising to bring John Deere home. His rhetoric found fertile ground. In towns where factories had closed, unemployment had doubled, and opioid addiction surged, his message struck deep. He wasn't just talking about machines, he was talking about dignity, about the right to belong in a world that no longer seemed to need you. But the issue reached far beyond politics. Economists warned that the John Deere fallout was a symptom of a deeper transformation, one reshaping the entire global order. As the cost of production rose in the West, emerging economies had begun to dominate the manufacturing landscape. In 2023, Vietnam and Mexico surpassed the United States in industrial growth rates. China, long seen as America's rival, had already moved up the value chain, leaving simpler manufacturing to its regional partners. This shift wasn't just economic, it was civilizational. The balance of production, labor, and innovation, once centered in the United States, was now scattering across the globe. Where America once exported goods, it now exported technology, patents, and debt. Where it once built, it now designed. And where it once employed millions, it now automated them away. John Deere's move to Mexico wasn't the start of this story. It was the culmination of it. In Washington, the reaction was mixed. Lawmakers from both parties condemned the decision, but few offered tangible solutions. Tariffs had failed before. Subsidies only delayed the inevitable. And rebuilding domestic manufacturing required not just money, but a generational shift in education, policy, and purpose. Behind closed doors, administration officials debated whether to pressure John Deere through defense contracts and tax incentives. But privately, many admitted that even if the company returned, the jobs would not. Modern factories no longer needed 10,000 hands. They needed 100 programmers. The anger of America's heartland was not just about economics. It was about erasure. The world they had built, where skill, muscle, and endurance defined worth, was disappearing, replaced by algorithms and outsourced labor. John Deere's green machines had once symbolized American ingenuity. Now they symbolized its vulnerability. Across the border, Mexico welcomed the expansion with open arms. The government of Nuevo León celebrated the creation of 8,000 new jobs, calling it a victory for North American integration. President López Obrador, in a carefully worded statement, described it as proof that Mexico is no longer the world's factory, but its partner. Foreign investors poured in, betting on a new industrial era powered by trade corridors that once served only as export routes. In Brazil, where additional plants were announced, the reaction was even more exuberant. The Brazilian real strengthened overnight, and the agricultural lobby praised the move as a validation of South America's rising clout in global farming. To them, John Deere's migration was not a betrayal. It was evolution. Back in America, the headlines grew harsher. Deere leaves, America weeps. Trump blasts corporate exodus. But beneath the political drama, a quieter reckoning was taking shape. One that asked a far more uncomfortable question. What does patriotism mean in a globalized economy? When corporations operate across borders and capital flows faster than policy, can any nation truly own its industries? John Deere, after all, was not acting out of malice. It was acting within the logic of a system America itself helped build. A system that rewarded efficiency, not loyalty. For decades, U.S. trade policy encouraged companies to seek cheaper labor abroad, to maximize shareholder value above all else. It was the creed of modern capitalism, profit before place. And now, that creed was coming home to collect its debt. Trump's fury, though politically charged, struck a chord because it spoke to something real. A growing disillusionment with globalization. For generations, Americans were told that free markets would lift all boats. But in the heartland, where factories closed and wages stagnated, the tide never came. In the months that followed, the debate turned philosophical. Was this the inevitable cost of progress, or the avoidable consequence of greed? Was the American dream dying, or merely relocating? Economists projected that the U.S. would lose up to 20,000 indirect jobs as a result of John Deere's restructuring. Yet stock analysts praised the company's strategic foresight, and shareholders celebrated record dividends. The split between Wall Street and Main Street had never been clearer. By mid-2026, the new factories in Mexico were operational. Videos emerged online of gleaming new assembly lines, automated, efficient, humming with life. In one of them, a worker wearing a green uniform lifted his phone to record a freshly built tractor rolling off the line. Its logo was unmistakable, made by the same company, but in a different country. The symbol remained. The meaning had changed. For the small towns left behind, the transformation was not cinematic. It was slow and quiet. Empty parking lots, silent cafeterias, houses for sale at half their value. Community colleges tried to retrain laid-off workers in software and robotics, but few could make the leap. You can teach code, one instructor said, but you can't replace belonging. In Washington, new tariffs were proposed, new promises made, but history had already turned its page.